Welcome back, everybody, to the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship Study Group. This is week 3 of the program, and we are here with Alex Stokes to talk about the consensus layer. I will give Mario a little chance to give Alex a quick interview, and then we'll jump right in. Or, sorry, introduction, not interview.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, and thanks, Alex, for being here. So last week we had met Light Client explaining the execution layer of Ethereum, and this week we have the other half of Ethereum covered by Alex here, completing the whole big picture of how Ethereum works. So we are very excited to have you here, Alex, because Alex is part of Ethereum Foundation. He's an expert in many important topics that are being worked on these days, like mainly MEV, all the current proposals about PPS, burning MEV, you might heard of, are being worked on by Alex to some extent. He works on a bunch of Rust software. There are many Rust people in the study group, so you might be interested to hear that Alex contributes to many Rust projects. And most importantly for today, he's an expert on the consensus layer of Ethereum. So I hope to learn a lot from you today, Alex. Thank you so much for being here again. I think we can jump right in. And the stage is yours.
Awesome. Before we get started, just want to remind everybody that if you have conversation or comments, questions, please post them in the Discord thread, the week 3 Discord thread. Go ahead, Alex. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, all good. Hear you well.
Okay, thanks. Sometimes I have AV issues. Anyway, great. Okay. I'm Alex Stokes. I'm a researcher at the Ethereum Foundation. Today we'll be looking at Ethereum's consensus layer. So, yeah, I think, let's see. So I'm pretty sure I can see, let me do this. What? Okay. Well, I think I can at least see questions in the chat. So if you have them, just drop them here, and we'll try to get to them as we go. What I'll try to do is go through some slides just to frame, what does consensus even mean? Why do we care about it in these blockchain contexts? And then I should be able to take some sort of live notes to, draw some diagrams and give you a little better intuition for the different things I'm talking about. So yeah, we will jump in and let's see here. I believe you can see this. So I guess somebody speak up if you can't, but Ethereum consensus. So let's dive in. So yeah, I kind of want to start from the very, very beginning and why do we even care about these blockchains in the first place? I think ultimately the really fundamental thing that they do is they manufacture digital scarcity, right? So you have this notion in the real world of, if there's, I have this example later, but let's say I go to the grocery store, right? And they only have 10 apples. They can't magically make more apples. If they give 5 apples away, they still only have 5. And it turns out that having this notion of scarcity in the physical world, there's a lot we can do with it to create a lot of value, at the bottom line, right? So the question then is how can we do this in this digital realm that's kind of taken over all of our lives and is only becoming more and more important as we go. So the place to start, right, is that we figured out how to make digital goods, right? So all these cat photos on the internet, digital textbooks that you might see, and more and more of our world today. The thing is that you can basically copy all of these things, right? If I give you, again, one of these cat JPEGs, you can just copy it as much as you want. There's no way to represent scarcity in this digital world. There's been a huge history of this being an issue, right? So if I have a movie that, someone wants to protect in terms of intellectual property, once the movie's out and sort of the internet, it can easily be copied. There's file sharing with BitTorrent and all this, and yeah, it's kind of been a mess. And, the reason people care about these blockchains is because they generate this digital scarcity, and I'll kind of explain why. So the reason this is important is because, again, you can use this property to like represent all these things in the physical realm and like our intuitions around them being scarce in this digital space, right? And you can use this for like all sorts of things, like money, like tokens. These are pretty like familiar examples if you're in the blockchain context. But then more generally, like, property rights. So, one day you'll probably be able to put like the deed to a house on the blockchain. And, the exciting thing beyond this is that I think there's still a lot more that will kind of come out of this, and we're still figuring out what's possible. So if anything, I think this is a very exciting space to be in. And yeah, it's kind of this fun adventure, and we'll see where it goes. And the important thing here is that without this blockchain technology, you couldn't have this thing where you could make these like unique digital objects, again, because you could trivially copy like anything before that. So, and this just like wasn't possible without blockchains. This is why people care about them. Let's see. Okay, it seems like that's working. Yeah, so okay, we have these blockchains. They give us this like property of digital scarcity, and like let's now try to like think about how we might do this. So, let's just zoom into like one use case. Again, this kind of generalizes to any of these notions of like scarce objects we want to think about. But let's say we want to talk about a digital money, right? So we have money. Let's say like there's units of money, which are coins, right? So imagine like I can have coins. I can like spend coins. It really should follow your intuition of like having money in the physical space. When we say scarcity here, we mean there are only ever like say n coins at one time, right? So like if I have 100 coins, I can't like spend 200, for example. There's like a fixed number at any point in time. So, I'm not sure what everyone's background is, but either way, let's just assume that the following things make sense. And again, if you have questions, just drop them in the chat. So, right, okay. So, we'll kind of have this like straw man example, right? So like you might be familiar with like a web server running in like, what we call Web 2. So there's something like Facebook, Meta, or like, Instagram, all these different social media platforms, Twitter, which I guess we now call X. Either way, you just imagine that you have some money protocol. You can like write software to implement the rules of this protocol, and it just runs on someone's web server. And the big thing here is that whoever's operating this server, you trust them to make sure that there are no double spends. And this is again kind of the core property that we want to get out of our blockchains. And I have these examples here. Again, it should really mirror your intuition from the physical world, right? So if I'm at the grocery store, let's say the grocery store has like 100 apples. If they sell me one apple, then they only have 99 left. They can't go make like 200 apples, 300 apples, right? They can't, they can't just magically make apples. They have a certain number, and if they give some away, then that's that. Now in our money protocol, you can imagine it's a similar thing where, if I only have 100 coins in the protocol and I send you 5, I only have 95 left. When we say double spend, we kind of mean this thing where out of my 100, if I send you 5, I should definitely have 95. I can't send you 5, I can't send more than 2 people 50 coins each, right? Because I would just not have that many coins. And the important word here is that you're trusting the operator, right? And historically, we've never been able to like trust an operator to like uphold this sort of protocol. And in particular, it's like double spend property. So there's like a number of ways this can happen. One of them is just like a bug in the software that's implementing our money protocol. And what this could look like is the server like accidentally makes extra coins, right? So let's say they commit to there only being like 1,000 coins, and there's some bug, and suddenly there's like 1,001 coins, right? For us using this protocol, that's like not quite fair. We want there to only be the number that they claim, and it's again a bug if somehow there's more. The fact that there's like a single operator, like central server that's like coordinating all this, is also an issue on the security front, because there could simply be like an active attack, right? So maybe there is a bug, maybe the operator themselves is like not in a position to exploit the bug, for example, because they don't want to. They want people to believe that like their money protocol is good. But an attacker could compromise the server and then, you know, trigger the bug in their own way and make these extra coins for themselves. And if we've all believed that these coins are like useful for some reason, this is like directly profitable for the attacker, so they're incentivized to do it. You could even have another scenario where the operator themselves is just simply not honest, right? So, you know, if I control this money protocol and people like the money protocol, you know, maybe I'm just making a few extra coins on the side because again, it's profitable for me to do so. And in particular, like this is the key point here, is that if you ever make one of these protocols where someone is incentivized to, you know, if there's a way for them to profit from this, like basically they will, just it's a matter of time. And yeah, the reason we're using this in the first place is because these coins are valuable for some reason. And so again, it's like there's this direct financial incentive for people to actually attack this thing. So, okay, because of all this, you know, we kind of get to this problem where this trusted operator is not great. So what can we do? Well, try to get rid of it. Very simple solution. As we'll see, this has led to like decades of research into like how to actually do this. It's actually quite tricky. So let me just check the chat to see. Okay, I guess everyone's still following. So, okay. A key point here is that like to the extent that you can make a, you know, sort of credible protocol that everyone can trust, the more useful it will be. And like I'm speaking like very broadly or abstractly, because it's like it's kind of a key point to get across that if we do want to make something that's like maximally useful, then it needs to be, you know, the point I'll get to is it needs to be like minimally trusted, right? Let's say we have two operators and like one of them is like pretty good, but like sometimes has issues, you know, their money is just not as good as another operator who like never has any of these bugs I listed above, right? So to the extent that we can like drive towards this like trust minimized setting, the more useful our abstraction of this like digital scarcity will be, and the better this will be in terms of creating value for people. And we should care about this because, you know, there's so much value we see in the world by like having structures to handle physical scarcity that you would expect we could do a similar thing for digital scarcity, right? And as you've seen with the growth of like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and everything else, right? A lot of people care. There's a lot of value that probably will come out of this. And, you know, there could even be applications we haven't thought of yet that would do even more. So it's a very worthy goal. So let's try to think about how would we remove this like sort of straw man protocol with this single trusted operator. It turns out it's pretty hard. So again, sort of the like obvious thing is you're like, hey, I have this thing. There's like one single party that is like a point of failure. You're like, obviously, like a very direct thing is just to say, well, get rid of the single leader here, the single operator. And the way you would think about doing this is rather than having one node in the system that controls everything, you distribute the protocol across all of the nodes. Luckily, there's like a very rich academic literature on distributed computation. And maybe from there, we can like learn some things about how to do this for the context we care about. And generally how people have thought about this is, you know, rather than just have one node in the system, you now have n nodes, which all compute the same thing. So if you think about it, you know, like if we have this money protocol, what are we actually doing? Like people can like mint money in the protocol. You know, let's say I want to like buy 100 coins. Then also you can transfer things in the protocol. Let's say I want to like send 5 coins from like me to you. Okay. From there, you can think about this as all of the like the way that we're going to structure this now, so that we can have everyone sort of join the system. These like end nodes I'm talking about join the system and work together. You structure them in a way that they compute the same thing given all these inputs, right? So we assume that everyone has all the same inputs to the protocol, which, you know, if you think about it, it's just a record of all the transactions. Like when we mint coins, you could also imagine like burning coins or something to withdraw. But either way, there's ways to like get in and out of the system, and there's ways to like transfer these coins within the system, right? And if you take the entire list of the entire history of this whole sort of economy we're building, you can imagine if you just like sort of sum these inputs in the same way, you'll get a single output, right? And in this case, a single output would just be our current ledger of everyone's balance. So at any point in time, we can ask the end nodes, like, hey, what are everyone's balances in the system, right? If I started with 100 coins, I spent 5 to you. Now suddenly it says I have 95 and you have 5 coins. And if you think about it, you could do this for any sequence of transactions we make. And at any point in time, you can look at the sort of summary, which is this output. So going back to this like academic literature and all the work that's been put in this, over the past couple decades, this concept is called state machine replication. The replication here is referring to the fact that, we have multiple nodes in the system. They essentially all duplicate, this same work, this like input log to get the same output. And in particular, this is what we mean by consensus, is that every node in the system should eventually agree on the outputs. So again, you write your program, your protocol as this like deterministic function of the inputs. You imagine then that if you have an honest node, they're going to run the same function on the same inputs. They have to get the same output, right? Like assuming there are no bugs or anything in the protocol, for the same set of inputs, you get the same output. This is useful to get rid of our single trusted operator because as the number of nodes increases, the system becomes harder to attack. Rather than exploiting a bug, say on one node and taking down the whole system, you now have to, say maybe attack 2 or 3 or maybe all of them. And there's this notion of a majority in the system. And this is really what we mean when we say consensus, is that at any point in time, there should be some majority of nodes that all have the same view or the same, output, the same state. When they do this, then even if some of the nodes are faulty, you still have a majority of them saying like, this is the state of the world, right? And so this is the idea, is that it becomes much harder now to attack our system as we have more nodes who are doing the same thing. Okay, very little chat. I'll assume everyone's following along. Let's see here, 1 second.
Yeah, just to be clear, Alex, a lot of the chat is happening in Discord, so there's not much YouTube chatter or chat
Gotcha.
in this particular platform. So Mario and I will chime in if there are any important questions or comments to be said, since you're not looking.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I can also try to find the Discord, but that might be a side quest for me. So anyway, yeah, just let me know if there's something I should address. And okay, let's jump back in. So the point here is that we want to increase the number of nodes in the system. And, if all of our software is correct and our invariants hold, then we should end up with the same output, and it becomes much harder to attack. So this notion that I'm circling around in the literature around consensus, this is referred to as Byzantine fault tolerance. So, the logic goes, okay, if more nodes in the system means that it's more secure, then we want like a very high number of nodes, right? I'm calling it in here, so like a very high number. And, you can imagine the limit. This is like every node on the internet, right? Like your refrigerator could participate, your computers at home, all the computers in like these data centers, I don't know, your car driving down the highway. Like you can imagine everything connected to the internet can like participate in this protocol. And then you have an incredibly high number of nodes. It becomes incredibly hard to attack the system. So the thing is though, as you move to this setting on the public internet, the internet is just like, again, permissionless open system. People can join and leave. And in doing so, things can start going awry. So to give some examples, let's say we have like 20 nodes on the internet. The internet is a faulty system. And so, for example, some nodes could simply miss messages from other nodes. If I go to like my, local node at home and I send it, hey, transfer some coins from me to you, it could just be the case that, for no reason other than like, chaos on the internet, my transaction doesn't end up getting to enough nodes to be part of the consensus. There could be bugs in implementation. So you can imagine that, we have all these nodes out there and they have like different implementations of the same software. And again, as long as there's a correct implementation, right, they'll compute the same output, everything's good, but there could be a bug. And so maybe some nodes kind of fall off the network or see a different view. There can also be hardware failures. So this is kind of similar to like a failure just in like the transport of the internet, but you could imagine, you know, I'm running the money protocol on my toaster, and my toaster goes down because I'm like making toast, and it doesn't have enough resources to also process the transactions, right? And so for maybe some short period of time, this node would go offline. Or there could be an active attack. Again, going back to the previous thing where, if this is a useful or valuable protocol, people then are directly incentivized to like try and break it. So someone could be actually actively attacking some subset of nodes on the network. And all of these types of things, we want to call this like Byzantine fault. And again, this is coming out of the academic literature, but the idea is that if we have one of these consensus protocols running, we want to make sure that it's tolerant to any arbitrary failure that could happen, right? So again, there could be a bug, a node could be acting incorrectly or dishonestly. Whatever happens, we want to be sure that, at least on some time scale, eventually you get to the place where a majority of nodes have the same view. If not, then there's a consensus failure, and our protocol is broken. So if you want to really dig into this, go look up Byzantine fault tolerance. Again, there's like a lot of literature out there about this, even pre-crypto. But the idea is that basically, okay, we assume some nodes are actually just faulty in this way. Some fraction f are faulty. We still want to make a consensus protocol such that we can agree on the outputs, even in the presence of this faulty fraction. And again, there's a lot we can go into here. We'll kind of focus on Ethereum, so I'll just briefly touch on these. But at a high level, the general way to think about this is what they call two-phase commit. So what this means is that assume we have our end nodes in the network, and then basically, one or some number of the nodes says, hey, I think the next state of our protocol is, X, I don't know, some random state, say incorporating our, the most recent transfers in the system. Those most recent transfers would then take the balance at time t to a different set of balances at time t plus 1. And the way this two-phase commit works, there's again two phases. The first phase is, let's say there's some node in the system that says, hey, I think the next state is this. They kind of send this state to everyone, meaning all the other nodes in the network. All the other nodes then have to acknowledge that. And then once you've seen a Byzantine fault tolerant fraction, say 2/3, you end up in this place where I know that I'm going to have a majority agree with me because they've already done so. So that's phase one. And then phase two then is saying, basically, I just accept that this is the new state of the protocol. And the way this works is that, again, assuming that I've reached my fault tolerant threshold, say, 2/3, then there's no way that like there could be another majority view anywhere else in the system. And again, there are many examples of this that people have actually built out. This is a problem people had long even before crypto. Just as we tried to scale the internet doing this exact same thing, you'd have many nodes out there, and you wanted them to be tolerant to these types of failures. In particular, culminating in PBFT. This stands for Practical Byzantine Fault Tolerance. And it's a protocol that basically lets you do this. The issue, though, is that with PBFT and many of these more classical BFT protocols, they kind of were limited in node count. In particular, you get like this quadratic message passing in PBFT in part because of this two-phase commit. And what we mean here is that, if there's say like, 10 nodes in the network, they have to exchange say 100 messages to actually like agree that this is the state and that also everyone else sees this as the same state. What this means is that these systems are kind of limited in how many nodes you could have. And, the point I was trying to get across a second ago is, especially for these things like, making these systems that represent digital scarcity in like a very secure way, you actually want the node count to go much higher than what we could practically get with these types of protocols. And again, if you want to dig more into this, this general problem is the Byzantine generals problem, where they're trying to like solve this, right? We want to be able to come to consensus with like a very high number of nodes, even in the presence of like some malicious or some Byzantine fraction. And for a while, this is kind of the state of the research, and that was the best we could do. People were researching this, but ultimately, we're kind of just moving along until the advent of Bitcoin. So I'll talk a bit now about, we're moving into the crypto context.
Before we go on, Alex, we got a question here.
Sure.
Nana is asking, does the PBFT protocols have like an upper bound? And if yes, what is that practically speaking?
Yeah, good question. So it's not that there's like a hard upper bound. It's more that the more nodes you would add, the more overhead. And so, for example, the system would be slower, right? Like if you have 10 nodes running the protocol, then you can say, you know, process messages with like, I don't know, for example, let's say like, you know, a couple hundred milliseconds of latency. As you went to like 100 nodes, then you can imagine, you know, there's this like much bigger scaling of the overheads. And then at a certain point, you know, if it's going to take us like minutes to agree on the next state of our like all of our transactions, then the system starts to become less useful. And you know, this is a problem. For example, if we want to do something like, okay, let's do like Visa, which is this like credit card network. They process like, you know, I don't know, thousands, if not more, of transactions per second. And you get to a place where if you want that same level of throughput, your consensus protocol for like a high number of nodes beyond just like the few, you know, trusted Visa servers, it takes too long. And in general, there's this like trade-off basically between like throughput and latency. And, you know, these consensus protocols are not magic. They're bound by the laws of physics. And so they, you know, have to follow the same constraints, right? Yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
So, okay, great. So, right, there was a bit of a like innovation with Bitcoin. And this is what everyone got very excited about originally with crypto, is like in some sense, you know, Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, proposes the system that, you know, in some sense solves this Byzantine generals problem. So the cool thing here is that it scales to an arbitrary node count. So like you can kind of get past this bottleneck of having, you know, some set number of nodes agree. And in particular, right, the way the system's designed is anyone can like join or leave. And again, the system, you know, together is like very tolerant to this type of behavior. There's a consensus that we'll look at in a second that gets you to the same state. And yeah, nodes can freely come and go. And you kind of get through, you know, you get around the scalability bottleneck. So in particular, Bitcoin has this notion of proof of work. You take this proof of work, and it also at the same time gives you this notion of like weight to a chain or difficulty. And the consensus algorithm is like pretty straightforward. You just look at the chain out there that you can observe just from the public internet, and you pick like the heaviest chain or the one with the most work done. And if you do this, as long as you have the same view of the chain as everyone else, you'll eventually get to the same state of the chain, because, you know, assuming there's an honest majority of nodes in the network, they're going to all be following the same protocol. They're going to all follow the heaviest chain. And if you do this, you end up in the same place. So let me see what's next. Okay. Yeah. So let me actually move now to, I'm going to draw some diagrams to kind of unpack what I just said. And I'm going to need a second to get this set up. Okay, let's see. We'll do that. And then I think I'm going to have to stop this, but I'll come back here. And okay. So I believe you can see this. So, okay, what do we mean here? So the way to think about this is that we start from some initial state. This is like the Genesis block in Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter what it is, but you know, we have our little block here. I'll put a G on it for Genesis. And the idea now is that anyone who wants to join the system, they come and they can add a block, right? So let's say then we have like a bunch of transactions out here. I'll just do some like little dots. And these are the transactions that are saying, you know, I'm going to send 1 Bitcoin from me to you. We'll send like half a Bitcoin over here, whatever they do, right? These like just transfers in the system. The way that this works is that if I want to propose a block, and again, anyone can do this. We'll see kind of how this works in a second, but basically I like bundle all of these up and then I make a block. So there's a block here. I'll go ahead and delete these because we moved them somewhere else. And yeah, there's like a couple things going on here. So the key thing to realize here in Bitcoin is that there's this like proof of work notion. Proof of work is that it's like, again, yeah, this notion that basically when I see this message, there's some cryptography involved such that I know a certain amount of work or like computational power was dedicated to this block. One way to kind of think about it is that you're like sealing the block. You're like adding this like special thing that can prove to anyone, no matter what, it took a certain amount of work to produce. And the way this works is that basically there's this notion of cryptographic hash where, you know, I give it some data, I get back this like unique sort of like digest. And yeah, basically the only way to get this digest, because these hashes are like somewhat random, the only way to get this is like I must have just computed the hash. There's like no way around that. So the first thing you do, well, I mean, there's a couple things you do, but you know, imagine now we have our block and then we have like all our transactions in here. Okay. You know, so one cool thing is that this block is going to reference the hash of the previous block. And this is like this arrow here. It's like this pointer. You do this just so you can actually establish a history, because, you know, if I just had some block over here that's just like floating off in space, you know, I need to know like the context of how these transactions should be sequenced. Because ultimately, you know, maybe we'll think about it this way. You want there to be like a unique sequence. So imagine this, you know, I'm drawing transactions here, and, you know, this is like, you know, plus 5 Bitcoin to like some other account A, you know, plus 0.5 to some account B, whatever they are. There should be a unique sequence. And this is why we need consensus to get this unique sequence. And then anyone can just basically replay them all. And you end up at the end with the same state. You know, account A has whatever, account B has whatever, account C has whatever. You know, I don't know, 3 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoin, you know, 24 Bitcoin, whatever it ends up being. So the way we do this is, again, we need this like unique sequence that we're going to kind of represent or like serialize with these blocks. And so you need this notion of like parent block. So the way you do this is basically you have like a hash of this thing. I'll just say like H of G. You actually just write H of G in this block. And this basically says, okay, I know that this is here. Maybe I'll, well, let's try this. Hash of G. Either way, hopefully this is clear. Sorry, it's a little cramped. But basically you have the hash of this previous block and this one. And again, the way these cryptographic hash functions work is that there's no way for me to know this hash of the previous block unless I have the previous block. So you have that. It has all the transactions in here. And then also now there's this proof of work, which, you know, the way we can think about it is it's just like this like seal of approval, put a little check mark that says I did some amount of computation to actually make this block. Okay. There's a couple of things going on here. So the first thing we get is that this proof of work is like this rate limiter thing, or this notion of Sybil protection. So this is like a big thing in, again, these like open permissionless systems that anyone can join. You need to like have some way to like limit how many blocks can be made at a given time. Otherwise you get like, you know, there's now like 10 trillion blocks floating out here and it's a mess. You know, my toaster's like going offline because it just can't even handle this many blocks, and we have a big problem. So the first thing that all these different proof of work or proof of stake, which we'll get to in a second, the way these protocols work is they have some notion of like this Sybil resistance, meaning that, you know, on a reasonable amount of time, only sort of one person, let's say, or like a few people can make one of these updates or new blocks at a given time. So let's clean this up a little bit. And the other thing now is that, and this was like, you know, one of the insights of Bitcoin is that not only do we get the Sybil protection with this proof of work, which is this like costly function to compute, it can actually be used for consensus. And so the way this would work now, let me zoom out a little bit if I can figure this out. So yeah, let me actually just clean this up a little bit. So the way this would work is that, you know, now let's say there's like a few blocks in the chain. Okay, cool. And okay, I'll just draw a few more for fun. So we have these blocks in the chain. And again, the way this would work is that you know, maybe start from your Genesis state, which could be like no one has any coins. And you can now just replay all the transactions, just going block by block in sequence. And again, it's the state machine replication idea where if I have the same inputs, we all have a correct implementation of our money protocol, we all end up with the same outputs, which in this case, for example, would be our ledger at some point in time. So we do this, and right. The other thing here now is that with this proof of work, there's this notion of difficulty, which we don't really need to get super into the weeds of how this works, but ultimately there's a notion of difficulty, which is how much work a particular proof of work represents. A way to think about it is it's just a number. So we could say, okay, this like first block in the chain here maybe had difficulty like 15, and these are like arbitrary numbers. All you really need is that they are, numbers that increase. So, let's say there's difficulty 15 here. The next block has even like difficulty 1. So that will be interesting in a second because it's not strictly increasing, but it's just more. And then, I don't know, let's say there's like 2,000 work on this last block. So now the consensus algorithm is like pretty simple. And again, this was like part of, well, it's a whole conversation about Bitcoin and simplicity, but ultimately, the way to think about this is that this is very simple to do, and this is like something that's very attractive about Bitcoin, at least, is that the way I find the head of the chain, meaning like the most recent block, is I just sum these up and I take the one with the most work, and this is what I meant by heaviest a second ago. So here we would say that we have, I don't know, I guess I should pick better numbers, but that would be what, 16 and 2,000. So total work here, total difficulty would be 2016. Okay. There's no fork in this chain, so consensus actually is trivial. You wouldn't need to actually even look at this. You would just go to the most recent block and say that's the head of the chain. Okay. Let's look at another example now where it's a little more complicated. And let's say we have this, and then, okay, so again, the way to think about this is like anyone can come and propose a block really at any time. So let's say that we are, over here somewhere at this state of the chain, maybe back at the first block, and then now someone else is going to come along and they're going to make another block. And let's say, yeah, we'll do it this way. So let's say someone makes a competing block kind of around the same time as, our second block here. But their block has, difficulty, I don't know, we'll say 10. The details actually get a little more complicated, but this should give you some intuition for how this works. Let's say this has difficulty 10, and then someone else comes along and makes another block that has difficulty like, I don't know, 3,000. So I missed the block, sorry. So we have this like very heavy block over here. So now the way to think about this is we now have all these blocks floating around. Like, let's say, again, we have our toaster running on this network and it's seen this set of blocks. We need to pick one unique head of the chain. Now, because, a block can only commit to one parent, you have the sequence where you could basically have, let's see if I can do this. There's a chain here, right? There's also a chain here. And this is just following these parent linkages. So you start at maybe say, this leaf, which would be, how do I get back to the other color? Okay, this is fun. I guess I'll do this. So, we start say from like this block and this block. And then the way this would work is there's now sort of these competing heads of the chain, and we still want to get back to this like single sequence. So we need to apply our consensus algorithm now to get to one head of the chain, right? Which is picking basically this block or this block. And in Bitcoin, we follow this difficulty number, we sum them up, and basically we say, okay, looking at the top chain, it has difficulty 2016. Looking at the bottom chain, we get, what is that? 3025, right? So yeah. So the intuition here is that basically we saw this bottom chain. Well, we saw both chains and we need to pick one, and we just simply pick the one with more work done. So in that case, what we would say is that, let me maybe make this green, that this is the current head of the chain, right? And in particular, that means that all of this other, like this competing fork of the chain, this one, let me use this color. So this chain here, the red chain, basically we just ignore it, right? And this is cool now because, yeah, anyone can come and join the system as they please. If I maybe missed this history, but I'm coming online now, I just download the same set of blocks, and independent of anyone else, I can just follow this difficulty, which is again just a consequence of this hash function. And yeah, it's clear to me what the head of the chain is. If I want to go make another block, then I know that the way I do that is I just make one here that has parent here, and the system keeps going, right? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to switch back to the slides now. Hopefully that made sense. I know that, yeah, there's, well, I'll hope that makes sense. Let me go back here. So great. And okay. So yeah, I was trying to get across this notion that there's this proof of work thing. Hopefully my diagram made it a bit clear that anyone can download these like messages from the internet, and there's a way to find a unique chain, even in the presence of competing chains. Now just to like use some of these words that we were using a minute ago, right? So this is like structured as a state machine replication. The inputs to the system are these transactions. So they're just Bitcoin transactions organized into blocks that, spend Bitcoin here and there. And the output again is just like replaying all of these transactions in a unique chain. You get back a unique state of the ledger. There's some things you can do here around using cryptography to like reduce the possible, I'm calling this state space, but like in particular, if I just make a transaction, I probably want to like have it be signed. So, it's uniquely from me. It's like authorized for me to actually move the coins and not just have them out there. I mentioned this thing about the parent hash, right? Because otherwise you could imagine kind of like when I was drawing the like sea of blocks off to the side, it greatly reduces like how complex this protocol can be, this like algorithm you have to compute if you can like restrict how many options you can have, right? And again, cryptography here is very useful for this. In particular, you don't have to like trust some other third party to tell you these things, because you can just run the cryptography locally and like get to the same facts yourself. So again, we're reducing trust in the system. Then you use proof of work to implement the consensus here. And again, there's this notion of syllable protection where you just have to do some amount of work before the block's even considered valid. And then in the same breath, this is kind of a cool thing about Bitcoin, is that it leverages this in multiple ways. But not only do you get syllable protection, but you also can use this this notion of difficulty to implement your consensus, right? And to give you one unique chain. There's another cool bit with like these cryptocurrencies that they also, have this like native currency they can issue, right? So you just make up this money protocol. You can actually then also hand out money as rewards to incentivize people to actually, extend the state of the chain. Because again, remember, we're now in this setting where it's a permissionless open system. Anyone can come and join. Without some incentive to actually like add another block to the chain, you might imagine that no one cares, right? And so then it's just like the protocol stops. Right. So then you have these rewards, and it seems to work. Like Bitcoin's still running, people care about it, and yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so hopefully this gives you some notion of what we mean when we talk about consensus in these distributed protocols. That was Bitcoin, just because it's usually like a pretty straightforward, simple way to think about this stuff. And now we'll turn to Ethereum. So in general, yeah, there's a lot to say here, but basically, Ethereum today is in this proof of stake consensus that I'll explain a bit more in a second. Previously, we had a proof of work consensus mechanism. There's this event called the merge that basically swapped us from proof of work to proof of stake, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But ultimately, yeah, we now have this consensus layer of Ethereum that uses this proof of stake protocol. And yeah, So let's look at that. Generally moving from proof of work to proof of stake, the idea is rather than use this, what I'm calling an exogenous signal for the simple protection of consensus, namely this work you put in to like compute this right block hash to like, signal this is a valid block and it can go into the chain. We're going to use an endogenous signal. And here, I mean, with respect to the protocol, right? So the protocol itself can see now, because we have this notion of stake. So the idea is you have some coins, in this case, Ether. You lock up Ether as sort of like, this like risk capital or this stake in the system. And this is compared to say like work in Bitcoin, where the work is like this thing that's just happening. Like the Bitcoin protocol itself has no way to understand what work was done. Like you can't, it's this thing that comes from outside the system. So hopefully this point's clear. It turns out that doing this is really useful because now that you have an end protocol representation of this thing we're going to use for consensus, the stake, you can do a lot more with it. So that's kind of the second point around incentive concerns, but I'll just briefly touch on the first point, which is energy usage. So, people were and still are very concerned that the way this proof of work works is there's now almost this race to like toss as much work as you can into the system. This is good for the security of the system because the more work, the harder it is to make a competing block and sort of reorg the system to like some other history. But then at the same time, you have people just like dumping energy into the system. And especially if you don't think Bitcoin is useful or valuable, then it seems like it's wasted in some sense. So there was this push and still is this push to think about, more energy efficient ways we can design these systems. And that was a lot of the motivation for moving to proof of stake. So at the same time, there's also incentive concerns around proof of work itself. And again, this kind of gets to the fact that there's no way, like you can hand out rewards for proof of work. You can like invite people to do this work to like add blocks to Bitcoin, but there's no way to like then turn around and punish them or like take away these rewards if they don't do what you want. So you kind of almost have like half of, the way to think about it is like carrot and stick. There's like a stick, or rather, sorry, there's a carrot, right? So you can hand out these carrots with Bitcoin, which are more Bitcoin, but there's no stick to say, okay, if you do something bad, if you try to actively reorg the chain or do something like this, I'm going to like swat you with the stick. And proof of stake, because you then have the actual consensus like resource within the protocol itself, it actually gives you a lot more flexibility around implementing this like stick, right? In particular, what we mean is you can actually hand out penalties for bad behavior, not just rewards. This reduces attack surface and generally makes the system more secure. And okay, so we'll dig into proof of stake Ethereum. So, at a very high level, it looks a lot more like these traditional BFT protocols. And again, I'll try to like throw up some diagrams to make that more clear. There's a notion of validator. So, the system is still permissionless to the extent that anyone can join, but they do have to put up this stake, which today is like 32 ETH. And the way this is going to work is that you essentially run something like two-phase commit, like I was talking about a second ago. And once you have a BFT majority, so once say 2/3 of the chain has signed off on some, unique state of the chain, there's no way to like sign off, have the majority sign off on another chain without there being what we call equivocation, or again, like some conflict. And because there's this resource within the protocol of the stake, if we do observe one of these equivocations or one of these, faults or conflicts, we can actually delete stake of the actors who messed up, so to speak, right? So, every action is essentially signed, and so you can actually have the protocol itself ingest these messages, and you can say, hey, a majority of the validators said this was the chain. Sometime later, they wanted to reorg to a different state of the chain, but this is actually in conflict. And so when they do this, you can then say, hey, this is bad. I'm going to ignore this other state. And moreover, I'm going to punish you somehow. This is what we mean when we talk about slashing, is that basically we can start to then even just delete this stake when we observe one of these faults. So ultimately, especially compared to these proof of work chains, it's less resource intensive, more secure. Sounds pretty cool. So I'm going to switch back to my little whiteboard over here and try to go through some of the details of the proof of stake protocol. This is probably a good time for questions if anyone has them.
There
give you
are
a
a
few
couple
seconds to surface
questions
those.
here.
Okay.
One question about is if there's a significance in the 32 ETH denomination for staking.
Sure, yeah. So there is. And it gets back again to the same bottleneck we were talking about a second ago, where there's this trade-off between how much throughput, or like how much your system can process over a given time and how long it takes. And the idea of the 32 ETH is that it's like striking some spot in this trade-off between there being too many validators, meaning too much overhead, meaning it takes too long to actually like come to consensus, versus there being too few and the system not being as secure. And yeah, I might touch on this in a little bit later, but ultimately, you know, even originally we were thinking something more like 1,000 ETH lockup. And, you know, that would mean probably a much smaller number of validators, but then the protocol would also be more secure. I believe Justin Drake actually suggested this use of BLS signatures, which is this cryptographic construct that lets you actually aggregate messages. So rather than have to process, say, like 100 messages, you can aggregate them into one. And, you know, for the same amount of work, you can basically do one processing that would stand in for 100, right? And because of this, we could actually scale the system. And, you know, what this meant then concretely is that rather than have, you know, fewer validators or something for the same validator account, we could actually lower the stake required. And so that's why we have the 32.
Cool, thank you. One other question. Is there an upper limit to the number of validators in proof of stake?
Theoretically, no. But again, you'll hit practicalities of like these being systems out in the real world. So we have just under 1 million validators on mainnet right now. The core devs very much are concerned about getting, you know, even like 2 million, right? Like there's been there's been like many optimizations we've had to put into the protocol, especially like the implementation to even get to this amount. We have our Haleshki testnet that's just over 1.5 million. And it works, but you know, we definitely do like sort of these like more ephemeral test nets, these like dev nets to actually see how high we can go. And basically, yeah, the number, you know, I don't think we can comfortably go much past that. And so, you know, at the very end, if we have time, I'll touch on some like future directions of things we're thinking about today. And one of them is very much figuring out actually how to like reduce the validator count for this reason.
Great. Mario, any other questions you want to surface?
I think it's good for now. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Let's see. And it has the little emoji reacts. Let's see. Let me just double check. I think time-wise, we're okay, like 30 minutes. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, let me switch back to my whiteboard. And okay, we should be good with this. So, okay, this was my previous scribbling around Bitcoin consensus. So we're now going to look at, yeah, let me just get a new page. I thought I could just do this. Apparently I can't. Yeah, this is great. Okay, yeah, we'll do it like this. So, okay. So yeah, let's look at Ethereum proof of stake. So yeah, let me think about where I want to begin. I guess just like to set the stage. Within Ethereum, we have these like in protocol consensus actors, the validators. And yeah, the validators do quite a bit. And this is maybe a little confusing because you don't, and this is actually something I think people have a misconception about around Ethereum generally, is that you're still like, you don't need to like lock up 32 ETH to be a validator to like validate the protocol. Like anyone can join the protocol. You know, I can go run a full node right now that I'm not a consensus actor in the protocol, but I'm still validating all the blocks I see, running the consensus that the validators provide. And I get to the same state, right? And this is actually really important because the validators are not necessarily trusted, right? They have this penalty, like we have this way to penalize them in the protocol. But as I'll probably get to later, you can get to a place where even if the consensus is like correct, the consensus could be on like a chain that doesn't implement something we agreed to. Like if there is a malicious majority even of the validator set, they could decide to say, hey, the actual consensus was over this like block where we printed 1 million ETH to all the validators. This would be like a strong violation of like the protocol, right? Because again, we have a notion of what Ethereum should do. There's like this Ether asset and everything on top in the EVM. And it should still follow the rules. Like the validators should have no special role in here other than provide this like consensus function. And we still want to hold them accountable and keep them in check. And the way that we do this is like we run the nodes ourselves, right? So going back to Bitcoin for a second, everyone running Bitcoin, even if you're not adding blocks to the chain, acting as this miner, you're still checking the protocol, again, to keep the miners accountable. Same thing here, where you still want to validate the protocol, even if you're not one of these consensus validators. So hopefully that's clear. So the way this works is you have validators. Today, if you want to like join the system, you like find your 32 ETH, which these days is a lot of money, but you have the 32 ETH. You send it to the special place in the EVM. And I'll kind of assume you guys generally understand how this works, at least in broad strokes because of the last talk looking at execution layer. But only you send your 32 ETH to this deposit contract, and there's a way then. Okay, actually, I'll draw that out. But let me just finish this contract. Okay, so this is now a really important thing to understand is that there's a consensus layer, CL, and an execution layer. And basically now there's like two almost different parts of the protocol that work together. Before the merge in like proof of work Ethereum, these things were kind of like, they kind of were like one unit. And in part, this was because the consensus protocol was proof of work. It was like relatively simple compared to like proof of stake. As you'll see, there's a lot going on. And for complexity reasons, security reasons, and also historical reasons, this new proof of stake consensus layer was developed kind of in parallel. And so that's like why we had the merge, was to basically bring in this new consensus layer to add consensus to the chain and replace the proof of work setting. So let's see. Yep, there we go. So there's a consensus layer, and one way to think about this is that there's almost like two different chains here, right? So there's like the consensus layer that's making consensus blocks. And there's also like this execution layer that, in some sense is also producing blocks. The way this actually works is like, this execution payload is inside each consensus block. So it's still just like one block, but you can kind of think of it as having these two layers, right? And within the execution layer, this is where all of our execution state lives. The EVM is running. This is where, for example, like the deposit contract lives. So say in this block, you like put in your 32 ETH into the deposit contract, and there's a way now that the consensus layer can basically read this execution layer, and it's just watching this deposit contract. So what this means is that when a new validator has put in 32 ETH, the CL can see this. It then basically makes an entry, say in the next block, to add a new validator. Okay, so there's a way for validators to enter the system. There's also a way for them to exit. There's a consensus layer message that they would add. So let's say, I don't know, let's go mini in the future. There's now, I'll start drawing big blocks for like the unified thing. But ultimately, this validator puts in an exit, let's say, because they want to stop validating. The exit's processed, and then ultimately, some many blocks later, you end up with a withdrawal off to some other, I don't know, some whatever. So they get to pick, their execution address to withdraw to. But let's say, we picked, I'll just write some random hex here. Dead Beef Cafe is always fun. And then how this would work is once the validator is done validating, there's many conditions that they have to satisfy to actually exit the system. But once they have, then the way to think about it is, if they have 32 ETH and maybe some rewards, so let's say they're up to like 34 ETH, that's withdrawn to this execution layer address. They could turn around and then like redeposit into the system and, however they want to do this. But basically, there's now this way to go from the execution layer into the consensus layer and back. And importantly, is permissionless. Like the only thing you really need to join the system is the stake, which right now is 32 ETH. So, okay, how do I want to do this? I'll just keep going. Okay, so I'm now a validator in the system. Like, what am I going to do? Like, the main thing I'm doing with respect to consensus is forming a consensus. And so how do I do this? The way it's going to work is that as a validator, I'm going to make an attestation. And if you dig into this stuff, you'll see this word like everywhere, mainly because this is the core thing that a validator is doing. And what an attestation means is it's basically saying, just based on my local view, this is the state of the chain, right? At some time, state of chain at, there's this notion of slot, which I'll explain in a second, but let's just say, at slot S. The way this works is that every validator, say there's like 1 million validators on mainnet, that means that over some period of time in these like rounds of the protocol, every validator will make one attestation that is basically signing over, they make a cryptographic signature over their state of the chain. And if there is only one chain, or like, the idea is that ultimately they should all attest to the same chain. And you can take all the attestations over some period of time. You can basically sum them all up, and you end up with some notion of stake weight on some fork of the chain. So yeah, I'll draw this out a bit more in a second. But ultimately, the idea is that, if I have my blockchain here, so this is now Ethereum. Of course, everything has a parent chain or parent block. That's nice. The idea is that when I go to make a new block in the chain, every other validator is going to essentially attest, to this chain. So I'll draw like many check marks because there are many attestations. And like in particular, if there was like some other block over here that claimed the same parent, this would not be a fork in the chain, right? Because these basically are saying relative to, this slot or this period in time, then, the next block is either this one or this one. And we need to know which one, right? This is the whole point of consensus, is that if our consensus protocol is working, we're going to pick just one, right? Because again, there needs to be this unique sequence. So the attestations help us here because we can basically use the attestations as a way to like weight these relative chains. So let's say there's like, 4 attestations, these like 4 check marks here. And let's say this block only gets like 2 attestations. Very similar to like proof of work, we're going to use the attestation, the stake for each attestation, right? Which is my validator stake in the system, as this like score to score the block. And so in this case, we'd have like 4 votes versus 2, and we would say this is the head of the chain then. So as we go to put the next block in the chain, we would build on top of this one. And I'll go into this a little bit more in depth in a little bit, but ultimately, this is kind of the idea of what these attestations are doing. So I use these words slot. So let's actually get into some of the details here. So the way this will work is that the protocol actually has some notion of like, what we call wall clock time. And what this means is that it's like actually the time you would see like on a clock, right? So like, if it's like, what is it, like 6:04 UTC or something right now, then, that's like the time. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick some genesis time. So I'll just say like, T0 for the genesis time. And the idea is that this was like when the consensus protocol started. And now to like actually structure things, we're going to divide our like wall clock time, just again, like our normal sense of time, we're going to divide it into slots. I'll write this down. It's an important concept. So we have slots. The slots could be generally like whatever time we want. Today they're 12 seconds, and maybe we'll talk a bit about, what that means. But the idea is that every 12 seconds, there's a new slot, T1. Well, I could actually even just number these. You know, slot 0, slot 1, every 12 seconds, right? No matter what actually happens, this is just following the time out in the world. And so you're always going to have a new slot every 12 seconds. Okay. So we have these slots from here now. And there's things that happen in each slot, and I'll illustrate that more in a second. But basically, the idea would be that, for example, every slot can have a block, right? So I can have blocks here. There is like, you know, very importantly, there's the possibility that, you know, whatever validator was supposed to propose in slot 2, they like missed their proposal for some reason. And so this is actually just missed. So I'll just do like a dotted sort of empty block here. The next validator would propose in slot 3. And again, you know, so this block would have this next parent, and it would keep going. So generally we have slots. The way you should think about it is that each slot has one block. This is like the block time of Ethereum. We kind of inherited this from proof of work, where it was like targeting maybe say like 14 seconds. So 12 seconds is just the number we settled on. And the idea is like, this is our smallest unit of time in the protocol, where you should basically put a block into the chain every 12 seconds, each slot. Okay. Now, what this means is that, you know, as a user, let's like, you know, go to the other end of the spectrum, back in the execution layer. When I'm a user, you know, if I make my like Uniswap trade here, right? Or I don't know, let's say I like broadcast it here. And then what I hope, if I can preserve enough of my drawing, what I hope is that basically a validator can pick up my transaction, you know, and put it into, here, I'll use a different color. Here's my Uniswap trade in blue. Hopefully they can pick up my transaction along with like many others, and they can actually put it into the block, you know, to go into slot 4. And, you know, if you're like using, I don't know, MetaMask to make this Uniswap trade, you know, there's some time before, say, it shows up on Etherscan, or if you even look at your local node, even better. But ultimately, there's some time before you actually get the transaction on chain. And that's because of the slot time. You don't have a new block until, you know, somewhere between 0 and 12 seconds, depending on when you actually broadcast this original transaction. Okay. So that's kind of a feel for sort of this like heartbeat of the protocol and how like things might line up with you making transactions. That's at the execution layer. Separately, there's like a lot of machinery at the consensus layer. And in particular, you know, so like here's one thing, these attestations. The idea again is that like for every slot, let me go back to my other color. So for every slot, right, you're going to have like some attestations, right? So like, I don't know, let's say attestation, like, you know, from validator 1, 2, 3, we go into this block, but also attestation like 4, 5, 6. And in general, you're going to have like many attestations per block. And then separately, you're going to have more for the next block, right? So I don't know. Pick your favorite validator indices, but ultimately, validators make attestations. The idea is that they should go to the next block. And in particular, the way this works is that for each of these blocks, there's going to be like a unique state of the chain they attest to, or that they commit to rather. And validators then, when they make these attestations, they basically just look at this block. They look at, you know, so this attestation, say from validator 1, 2, 3, they're going to look at the state of the chain. They're going to say, well, okay, so how it really works is that in this slot, they would actually look at, say, the prior slot, which in this case would even take you back to this block. But ultimately, they're going to look at the latest state of the chain, and they would sign over, hey, I think the current block is, you know, this one. That then would get included. Okay, I ran a little out of sync here. Sorry about that. Let me simplify this a bit. Let me actually just do this. So now we're going to zoom in actually into one slot. So let's say we'll take slot 3 as our example. The way this works is that, so this is a like, you know, t equals 0, t equals 12. And again, this is like slot 3. Over here is like slot 4. So we're just looking at one slot now. The way this would work is that the validator for slot 3, they're going to make this block here, you know, and they should release near the start of the slot. This is going to have attestations from the previous slot, let's say, all of my transactions, like my Uniswap trades and whatever. All the stuff that needs to go into the next block is going to be here. The way this works is then at like t equals 4, just to like divide this slot up into thirds, or yeah, thirds rather. Any validator who's assigned to test in slot 3, they're going to say, hey, you know, I'm going to make an attestation. Let's say the block root, as we call them here, is like ABD. They're going to say my attestation. So we're looking at validator 1, 2, 3 again. Their attestation is going to say, yeah, my state of the chain is ABD, whatever the rest of the hash is. They're going to broadcast their attestation. There are different actors who then basically have the next 4 seconds to aggregate them into like just a smaller package to go on chain. And the idea is that ultimately this attestation ends up in the next slot, right? So now we have the next block, which has, you know, again, like our Uniswap transactions or whatever new execution state there is, but then it also should include this attestation. Then you just get the blocks from the network. You can then count these attestations as they come in, and they can tell you things like, yes, you know, a majority of the validator set thought that this was actually the block in slot 3. Okay. So this is at the slot level. There's another notion that, okay, we're a little short on time, but that's my problem. So there's another notion, which is an epoch. So the way to think about epochs is that there's just some number of slots. And on mainnet, for example, there's 32 slots per epoch. And the reason we do this is that we basically want to like, there's like a bunch of consensus processing that is relatively heavy. And so we want to batch it so it only happens every so often rather than every slot. So the way to think about this is that, you know, here's our 32 slots. I didn't draw 32, but you get the picture. You know, this is like, you know, we'll just start at Genesis. So 0, 1, 2, 3, ... And this is, you know, this would be slot 30 and 31. So these are 0 indexed. You get to like 32 slots per epoch. And this then would be epoch, since we started at Genesis, epoch 0. The way you should think about this is, again, it keeps going just based on time. You're now in like epoch 1 here, and there's more slots. So this is now slot 32, all the way up to the next multiple. So you'd end up at like, you know, slot 63. You then go to epoch 2, slot 64. Hopefully that's clear. And the idea is, one thing you're going to do, for example, is like if anyone's trying to enter or exit the validator set, you're going to do that at this epoch boundary where you do all this heavier processing. I don't know what that was. Oh, I just deleted something. Okay. Right. So you are going to do this epoch processing, and the idea is like, you know, there's blocks here, right? So let's say ideally you have like 32 blocks. Great. And as you go here, not only are you going to do like the normal processing, but you're also going to say things like, okay, if someone got slashed or if there are any penalties or rewards, we're going to basically like hand these out and update the consensus state at this boundary. Okay. So we have slots, we have epochs, and yeah, okay. So like an important thing to realize is that, so we have like the whole validator set here. So I don't know, validator 0, validator 1, you know, for example, on mainnet up to like, you know, something like that, almost, you know, the millionth validator. And the idea is that they are randomly shuffled every epoch into these committees. And what that would look like is that for a given epoch, so here's our slots in the epoch, you know, let's say, for example, there's like 100 validators. Well, yeah, maybe I'll try to make this a little bit easier. So there's 32 slots. Let's just say there's 320 validators. So if there's 32 slots, that's something like 10 validators per slot, right? And the idea is like the 10 validators out of the entire set, which is now 320, you're going to randomly shuffle them and put 10 validators. Those look like blocks. Let me do something differently. So 1, 2, 3, validator 4, 5, 6. Again, the idea is that there are like 10 validators here. And this is like a pretty important invariant, is that a validator makes one attestation per epoch. The exact slot they do that in is determined by the protocol. There's this notion of like the RANDAO, which is the way this works is that when I go to like put a block in the chain, maybe I'll go back here. Yeah, so as I go to put the block in the chain, I basically put some like local randomness into every block. So we'll say like, R0, R1, R2. You basically just like mix them all together in a particular way. And the idea then is that there's this notion of randomness that you can then use to do the shuffling to decide then, say, for the next epoch, what this validator shuffling should be. Validators then make one attestation per each epoch, again, assigned to like some particular slot. So, now there's like 222, 196, and yeah. So similarly, you end up with all of them in a unique slot. And this then tells you that, yeah, maybe I'll just do this again. So basically it tells you that we're looking at slots now. Well, here, this will be clear if there's just one. So basically now, we're at like, this is like slot 23. This is at t equals 0 in the slot, t equals 12. Based on my view of the chain, I'm going to have some assignment. And let's say, again, our lucky validator 123 is assigned in slot 23 to attest. When they see this block, they then make their attestation. And this would then ultimately get into the next block. Okay. So, let me then touch now on consensus, and that will actually probably put us at time.
All right, I got a couple questions for you before we move on.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah, great.
Got one question is, can you elaborate on the time concept in proof of stake? Like why 12 seconds? How do they get split? Why are there 32 slots per epoch, etc.?
Right. So the 12 seconds is like kind of arbitrary. It was inspired by the proof of work block time, which was like on average about 14 seconds. So we just went for something a similar time. The number is kind of arbitrary. Like it could be smaller or longer. If it's smaller, then basically it becomes harder to like follow the chain. Like or maybe a simpler way to think about it first is the longer the slot, it gives you more time to like pass the blocks, pass the attestations, figure out which attestation should go into the next block and do all this. So again, now there's this trade-off between like how quickly the protocol can progress and the slot time. 12 seconds is what we have today. Some people argue for shortening the slot time because it means, for example, like this execution state would evolve more frequently. People also talk about lengthening slot time because there's like other consensus upgrades we're thinking about where it actually makes more sense to have a longer slot time to do more stuff every period of time. What was the other question?
Can you talk a bit about the randomness, about the RANDAO and how the validators are shuffled randomly or deterministically
right, okay.
randomly?
Yeah, so, okay, yeah, we can still see this. So the idea here is that, right, so there's one, I mean, I guess this is another important invariant. There's one proposer per slot. And kind of like I was alluding to, the proposer could like miss their slot, in which case there just isn't a block for that slot. But generally, especially on mainnet, people are incentivized to participate, and so they do their job well. And so you can imagine then that like every slot ends up with a block. Okay. And the way to think about this is that And when I go to propose, so let's say I'm validator, I don't know, 27. As I go to propose, then I'm going to also include some randomness, which, there's some details we can go look at in the consensus spec. Essentially, the way to think about it is I'm going to take like my slot number. So say this is like, I don't know, slot 45,000. I'm going to basically like take this number, maybe hash in some other things, and ultimately I'm going to get like a seed value that I'm going to sign over, just with like my validator private key. And the way this works is that the signature ends up being like a pseudo random value. So I'm going to get like some randomness. We'll just call it R. Then basically, I mean, again, these are like very low level details, but you take this randomness, which is the signature. You're going to hash that to get like down to 32 bytes, again, which should be pseudo random. Within the consensus state itself, so for each of these blocks, right, we're going to mix in each new random into the state. And what that means is that there's going to be some like current value from this having happened in the past. And then for each block, I'm just going to take whatever my random contribution was, and I'm going to mix it in to what's already there. So the way to think about this is that basically there's like, so for every block, right, the block's going to have some effect. There's now like a consensus state. We'll say S 45K, S 45,001. Hopefully you get the idea. But basically each block is going to make a new state. And then the idea is that within this beacon state, I'm not sure how helpful this will be, but just imagine there's some state over here as this triangle. There's going to be like some random value. Again, we'll just call it R naught. When I go to apply, say now my block, let's say I'm going to apply, block 45,001. There's going to be like some unique random from the proposer, which I'm calling R prime. We're going to combine these two and get back some like new value R1. And this happens for each block. And the idea then is that you should have some like random value that each proposer is updating as they go. And then separately, you get to this notion of shuffling. So the way this works now is like, there's a notion of look ahead, just so people know, and they have some time to like get ready to say, make their attestation or propose their block. But the way to think about this is like, let's say this is like epoch 1, 2, 3, epoch 1, 2, 4, epoch 1, 2, 5. So basically, the way this works is that at the end of this epoch, so like whatever this final block is, so there's many blocks here in this epoch, great. You're going to end up with some, unique random value. We'll call it like R1, 2, 3. What that then is going to do is basically tell you, okay, so it's a little backwards here because of the way the look ahead works. Let's instead say we're going into like this epoch. The way this works is that we're going to basically look back at the randomness we made here. And that's going to then basically tell us the shufflings for say like the next two epochs. Hopefully that's clear. This look ahead thing's a little confusing. But basically the idea is that at some point in time, say like here, we're going to look at the beacon state, which I guess I started drawing these triangles. We're going to look at the beacon state. There's going to be some random value. Again, we'll just call it R. And the idea then is like this R is an input to like say some code we run, some shuffle function, which takes like the entire validator set. It's going to take R and, for example, with attestations, like the committee size or something, it's then going to take all of the validators. So, again, on mainnet, this is like almost 1 million. It's going to say, okay, we actually want to break them up into like this number of committees per epoch. So, let's say it's like whatever number this is. We're then going to shuffle them. So, okay, the way we started was the whole list, right? So just counting the validators, validator 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to say like, 996, whatever, just under 1 million. We're then going to use this randomness here to shuffle these. And so then what that means is that we're going to end up with like a shuffled set. Say, validator 0, goes over to like, I don't know, say here, right? So you end up with like validator 0 here. And now this is like 45,956, validator 12, validator 0, validator 3. And the idea is they get shuffled, right, in some random way. Then, you know, if we want to break these up into attestation committees, you just then basically like batch them, right? And then this tells you, you know, in the next epoch, you end up with like, okay, I'm in this first committee, which is in, say, the first slot. And then I end up in the next committee, which is in the next slot, something like this. Hopefully that was helpful. I do want to, we just have a few minutes, so I do want to like explain a bit more about consensus and how this works. And yeah, unfortunately, there's actually a lot to say. So yeah, we won't necessarily get to everything today, but hopefully I've piqued your interest, and yeah, you can dig in more. So let's zoom out again to our notion of the Ethereum chain. So to close the picture on consensus, right, so we have, again, let's think about epochs. So like epoch, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 6, maybe something like this. And we're going to start with some block, you know, this could even be like the nuisance block or whatever, well, okay, this is where it starts to get confusing. So there's blocks here now because this was an epoch. These are now the slots, right? And again, sorry if this was confusing, but basically it's just like there's a new slot every 12 seconds, just like that. That's just how it works. Maybe you could like not have a block. Either way, you have these blocks, and these blocks now have attestations. So yeah, that's maybe a little cramped. But basically the idea is that, you know, if we have more blocks here, then they're going to basically have attestations to, you know, the state of the chain. And I guess I'll just switch to like check marks now. And, you know, you might have like quite a bit. But ultimately, the way to think about this now is with respect to consensus and this notion of like finality that we care about. This is like the whole thing that we're trying to do with proof of stake consensus, is to get to this notion of finality. And when something's final, it means it basically will never change. And I'll kind of explain a bit more what that means. The way to think about it is that we're now going to work kind of in terms of, we call them like epoch boundary blocks. But the way to think about it is just like the first block in an epoch is just going to stand in as like a representative for each epoch. And if you think about it, because everything is cryptographically linked via the parent hash, you know, like if I somehow like have the validators all vote, or maybe this is a better example here. If I have them like, you know, if even though these attestations here, right, they are implicitly attesting to like this being the block of the beginning of this epoch. Again, because these all have parent hashes. And yeah, sorry, there's so many arrows. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can now kind of zoom out, and you can now say, okay, for this epoch, there's like this block, and this block, okay. And, you know, the direct parent hash is from block to block, but the way to think about it is there's kind of these like linkages you can make between each epoch, right? And the way this is going to work is that based on the attestations we get in a given epoch, they're going to have this notion of justification. Let me actually just write that down. This is a key concept. What justification means is, again, this BFT concept that, you know, at least 2/3 of the validators have attested to a given block. So, you know, you could like count all of the attestations here, and they would ultimately, if you reach this threshold, then they would be justifying, you know, this block, right? So you have justification, and what this kind of looks like then is that you end up with, you know, a block tree that kind of looks like, you know, this picture, where you then have like yeah, maybe I should use, I guess I'll use blue or something. That would be nice. You can end up like justifying with respect to like one epoch, the previous epoch. So then you get these things. And now when these are blue arrows, what I'm trying to communicate is like, you know, you have like at least 2/3 of attestations, all referencing directly or indirectly, you know, these blocks here. Okay. So that's justification. And in particular, well, yeah, I think I'll talk about the splits in a second. But in particular, what we want to get to is this notion of finality. And finality here means that, again, it looks like we're kind of at time, so I'll just kind of be brief here. But ultimately, the idea is that if I, if I justify a justified block, then, and I'll call it B, if I justify a justified block B, then B is finalized. And in this case, we'll call this B, because what happened is, you can't see my hands, that's too bad. But basically, before we had these votes come in, we had justified B, basically, and this epoch, we had justified B. And then we came along and we justified this block, I don't know, call it C, we justified C, because we justified a block that had been justified, namely B. B is now final. And this is like the whole point of what we're trying to do, is get to this notion of finality. And let's see what to say here. I guess I'll just kind of explain what we mean here. What we mean here is that it's final because if we had then tried to attest, like if we had tried to justify a different block, let me do this. So sure, let's do something like this. Okay. Let me just draw these arrows. So, right. There's this, again, this notion of slashing. And for example, attesting to like two conflicting blocks here, this would be slashable. And then what this means is that you can't get in a situation where you've finalized two different histories, right? Say the top and the bottom. Because if you do, then what would happen is, say all of the attestations that tried to finalize, you know, this block, let's say, on this chain, they would be in conflict with the top chain, and you could then basically put these attestations as proof of misbehavior into the top chain. You would slash these validators, and you can't get to this situation where you finalize two conflicting histories without it being slashable. And so this is what we mean by final. You have this notion of like economic finality that does what we want. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I think we're at time, but I can stay for some questions. And yeah, sorry we ran over.
Thanks, Alex. No problem on going over. One question, can you talk a little bit about Gasper in the context of finalization and finding the canonical chain?
Right. So Gasper is like our particular like instantiation of this protocol that I've been trying to lay out. And again, this is where it starts to get a little complex, but basically there's almost two views. There's like the epoch level view, which is kind of what I was just talking about, where it's like you have blocks that are kind of representing like, you know, this like epoch level thing. But then within each epoch, right, you're still going to have, let's see if I can draw this. I don't know. I'll just do this for example. You're still going to have all the other blocks. And so like a really cool thing about Ethereum is we have this notion of dynamic availability. And the idea here is that basically you can keep adding to the chain. So let's say this is the head of the chain. You can keep adding to the head of the chain kind of separately from this finality process. So like even if finality for some reason, like let's say there's like a bunch of validators go offline, and they can't get their attestations on chain, then finality, we might say that we've only finalized this block B or this epoch B. The chain can still go on. You can keep adding to the head of the chain. And so then what that means is that this finality process is kind of trailing the actual blockchain. And so then if you go to like the head of the chain, say here, and I will zoom in now. So let's say this is like epoch I don't know, E-1, and so now we're here, and this is now, these are slots. So you still now have blocks in the block tree, meaning a proposer can go, let's say this was in this slot, this proposer proposes here, the next proposer, let's say they propose to say even back here. And now what you have in general is you now have the same block tree where you still need to make this consensus inference, meaning like, is this the head of the chain or is this the head of the chain? And again, we use the attestations for this. As these attestations in each block are coming in, they're going to attest to one block or the other. And that's going to say give, some weight of like, 100 ETH attesting here versus like, 1,000 ETH attesting here. And in general, then we have this other algorithm, LMD Ghost. You might have heard of it. I'll write it down. But it works very much like even where we solve proof of work, where you're going to say start from like some head we know, and then just basically like, this G here is like greedy. So basically find the one with the most stake weight going off the attestations. And so when we say Gasper, this is really what we mean is there's this like FFG friendly finality gadget. It's not super important what the acronym stands for, but ultimately this like epoch level process that hopefully is clear to some of you, if not all of you. We're doing finality on these like longer time scales, and this is like again, this finality gadget is providing finality, but then even within one epoch, E+1, within one epoch itself, we're also using this LMD Ghost protocol to like figure out the actual tip of the chain. So like when I go to like produce the next block, I need to pick this block or this block. And yeah, Gasper is just basically our particular instantiation of this consensus protocol that's like FFG plus LMD Ghost.
Thank you, Alex.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's probably all we have time for today, unless Mario, you have another question?
Yeah, I wanted to, if we can just touch on the PBS for a second. There was a question, we are going to dive into it more, but you're the man, and it's I think it's a good chance to just briefly, we are out of time, so if you can touch on that. Yeah, what's the motivation? What's the workings of proposal builder separation?
Right. So yeah, I wanted to start from like basics basically, and like go from zero to like how does the consensus protocol work? And it turns out that this protocol lives in the real world, and there's like so many other things that I don't have time to go into today, but basically have been consequences of the system. So yeah, I actually maybe will just write, I did have a few more things in my notes around like a few things here. So, just kind of looking at like the future of this proof of stake protocol and Ethereum generally, right? There's a bunch of things that we want to kind of do. One of them is like single slot finality, SSF. And this is basically saying like for many reasons, I don't really have time to get into, but because of the fact that you have this like dynamic availability, then there's both games sort of happening here that also impact this like epoch level thing. And it turns out there are like many different attacks that validators can pull off with this flexibility. And so rather than have this like finality process, like trail, say like 2 epochs behind the head of the chain, you would actually want to look at getting finality within a single slot. And again, single slot finality, the acronym should be pretty clear. That's one thing. Other things, I mean, yeah, I guess I'll just like write out what I have. SSLE. So this is basically, you'd want to make proposer selection be kind of secret or like just in time. Like the idea is that as a validator, so today you actually can go and look at the chain, and based on the Randolph thing that I talked about, you actually know 1 to 2 epochs ahead of time who the proposer is. This is not great because, you know, this is an open decentralized network. I can actually go and via various like network techniques, I can actually like identify on the peer-to-peer layer which IPs or which validators, for example. And then once I have your IP, if I don't like your block, that's going to come up in your slot. I can actually try to DOS you. And so one way that we could improve upon this is basically getting to a place where the next proposer is actually like secret, like they until, you know, just in time almost, where they have to like reveal some like election ticket, let's say, to actually have a valid block. There's other things. Max EB is one. So this is getting at this like 32 ETH balance, and you could imagine basically making it so that rather than sort of making one validator have 32 ETH, they could have like, I don't know, some much higher number, say 2048. This is important because right now, if I have say like, yeah, again, I don't know, 64 ETH, that must be 2 validators in the protocol. And this is partly how we got to like such a high number of validators, is like they just happen to these units of 32. Many people have, you know, much more than 32 ETH, like these big like professional staking operations, for example. And so you can imagine having one validator entity in the protocol with like a much higher balance. And this lets you consolidate the set. That's something. There's also like, yeah, there's like penalty cappings we've been looking at to actually like make the staking situation or the slashing situation a bit better. There's the whole economics itself. There's now like issuance around when validators are rewarded things, like how that goes into them. And anyway, okay, I'm just like brain dead and stuff now. That all being said, let me answer your question, which is about PBS. So this is another thing very much top of mind for all the consensus researchers. So we have PBS, proposer builder separation. And yeah, so the idea here is that the protocol doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's this very valuable execution layer, and there's this notion of MEV. And, you know, it used to stand for like maximum extractable value. The idea is that basically when I go, I mean, let's see, what's a good image I could use? Well, let me just start over. So, you know, when I keep drawing my box that I have and I have my transactions, it turns out that like some sequence of transactions could be more valuable than another. And yeah, I don't really have time to go into like the specifics of that, but ultimately, the way to think about this is that there is this notion of MEV where, you know, it's better to be sophisticated, as a validator. In part, so you can like extract this MEV, which I don't know, I'll just try to draw some coins or something. But basically, there's this notion that you're kind of leaving money on the table if you're like not pulling in these more sophisticated techniques to build blocks. And this is a problem because it basically harms decentralization. Why? Because let's say if some other validator is better at me at extracting this MEV, they can then, for example, offer better returns. They can attract more stake. And now there's this like flywheel where you have like big, massive staking pools, all run by say one entity. And then now rather than have like, you know, actually a million nodes that are all working together to secure Ethereum, there's now maybe just like 5 or like some smaller number, perhaps in like jurisdictional areas that are not favorable to like certain Ethereum transactions. So we want to stop this. And generally the way that we think about this right now is PBS, where you kind of want to separate off this task of like making the execution block. So yeah, maybe I'll draw CL and EL. There's now like a CL block here with like an execution payload that goes inside. And with PBS, you actually want to think about separating these two so that you can outsource building this thing, this execution payload, which is becoming a very sophisticated task, to some other entity. We'll call it a builder. And then as a validator, you don't have to like play these like very sophisticated games. You can just, again, outsource this to someone and then still profit from the work. That was PBS in like 1 minute. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Alex. Cool. Yeah, I think we're about 15 minutes over here, so I think we probably should wrap it up. But yeah, thanks so much for giving us a nice overview into the consensus layer. I'm sure there are some questions that didn't get answered. And so hopefully Alex can join our Discord server and see if there's anything in there that he wants to dive into. Yeah, thanks again, Alex. And we will see you all next week for a dive into testing.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Alex. We appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'll reach out to one of you two to get in the Discord, and I'm happy to answer some more questions there. So thanks, everyone. And yeah, I'll see you around.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Great. Bye.
And for everyone still listening, please take all the great materials and questions answered and everything that was discussed in the talk and the Discord chat and open a PR at Wiki. Feel free to add it to the corresponding doc or create a new one. We have a bunch of great contributions, so please keep it coming. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today for the consensus layer talk.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you on Thursday on the Hangout call. Yeah, I want to mention that as well. So yeah, if you want to just chat with us, discuss maybe what would you like to work on, contribute in the wiki, or just maybe even outside of the Ethereum, come to chat with us in the call. You can find the event on the Discord server. Yeah, between events. Thanks a lot.